Alright, so in this third video we're going to look at competition and consolidation, and then we're going to start getting into the steel industry and oil industry. And so these new technologies and industries tend to be overbuilt. That's one of the problems here. And this was certainly the case with the railroads built in the 1870s and 1880s, many of which were unprofitable. In addition to overbuilding, the railroads frequently suffered from mismanagement and outright fraud. Speculators went into the railroad business for quick profits and made their millions by selling off assets and watering the stock. Watering stock is just inflating the value of a corporation's assets and profits before selling its stock to the public. And so in this ruthless scramble to survive, these railroad companies competed by offering rebates, which are just discounts, and kickbacks to favored shippers, while then charging these huge freight rates to smaller customers such as farmers. Once again, this is the type of business management that's going to lead to the rise of the Farmers Alliance and the populist movement that we'll start to see in the late 1880s and 1890s. They also attempted to increase profits by forming pools in which competing companies agreed secretly and informally to fix rates and share traffic. A financial panic, however, in 1893 forced a quarter of all railroads into bankruptcy. J.P. Morgan and other bankers quickly moved in to take control of the bankrupt railroads and consolidate them. And then with this competition eliminated, they could therefore stabilize their rates and start to reduce debts. By 1900, 7 giant systems controlled nearly 2/3 of the nation's railroads. A positive result of this consolidation was a more efficient rail system. On the negative side, however, the system was controlled by a few powerful men like Morgan, who dominated the boards of competing railroad corporations through something called interlocking directorates. This is when the same directors ran competing companies. They had their hands in more than one railroad line. In effect, these interlocking directorates therefore created these regional railroad monopolies. And we're going to see one with Theodore Roosevelt, the Northwest Securities Railroad line, owned by J.P. Morgan, and Theodore Roosevelt will tackle this monopoly in one of his early trust-busting court cases in the 1900s. Railroads, however, captured the imagination of the late 19th century America, and as the public, local communities, states, and the federal government invested in their development. At the same time, however, customers and small investors often felt like they were victims of these slick financial schemes and these ruthless practices. These railroad Mongols, like a Vanderbilt, they seem to just to affirm this ruthlessness. William Vanderbilt, who had inherited his father Cornelius Vanderbilt's transportation empire, reportedly responded to these critics of his business practices by saying, "The public be damned." Just goes to show you that these people were out to make profits, and they cared very little about who they trampled or who got in, who they stepped on that was in their way to these profits. Some early attempts to regulate the railroad lines by law did little good. They weren't very effective. The Granger laws passed by the Midwestern states in the 1870s were overturned by the courts, and then the Federal Interstate Commerce Act of 1886 was at first ineffective, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. It wasn't until the Progressive era in the early 20th century that the Interstate Commerce Commission was given expanded powers to protect the public interest. So you do start to see the federal government take some steps to start to control these monopolies, start to regulate the railroad business with the Interstate Commerce Act and the Interstate Commerce Commission in the late 1800s. However, you will start to see that you will see that these laws at first were very ineffective. They really didn't have any teeth to really regulate the railroad lines, and if it ever did go to the Supreme Court, a lot of times the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the businesses, of the trust, of the monopolies. And so it's just, once again, it goes to, it's an example of the age that America was living in the late 19th century, where everything seemed to be very pro-business, and they didn't want to do anything that would get in this way to harm or stop expansion. And we'll start to see the blowback from that with the Populist Party and the Progressive Movement in the late 19th century, early 20th century. We'll go and look at the steel industry and the oil industry here in the next videos.